This podcast is sponsored in part by the Museum of Photographic Arts. From November 4th through February 27th, MOPA will present Defining Boundaries, the 12th annual juried youth exhibition that invited student artists to explore the theme of boundaries in photography and video. Students visually interpreted the theme to share a wide range of opinions and topics, including boundaries as physical barriers, positive hurdles, and emotional restraints. On view are the works of 100 K-12 students across San Diego County and Tijuana. Visit mopa.org for more information.
Hello from Maryland, here we go. I can't whistle in the cold, man. It's cold out here.
Thanks for joining us on the Voice San Diego podcast. I am Scott Lewis, I'm editor-in-chief at Voice. I'm here with my friend Andrew Keats.
What's up?
He's the assistant editor. And Sarah Libby is back. She's our managing editor. Sarah,
Hello.
how are you?
Great.
So we have a great show this week. We have the mayor, His Honor, Kevin Faulconer. He had a big speech this week. He came in and spoke about it. So we were going to get into that. First, I wanted to give a shout out to everybody who came to the member coffee this week. So been doing member coffees like a decade now, and they are big. We used to introduce everybody who was there, and that would take like 20 minutes. Now it would be impossible. So that's good. Half the people I recognize, half the people I don't. There's some podcast listeners out there. Thank you for coming. Really appreciate that. And I have also decided that I would be a bad fraudster. I would not be good at fraud.
Can't do a fraud.
What do you think is the characteristic that you're missing from a successful fraudster?
I'm just not a strong person. And so I've been reading, it seems like the most nonfiction I read, and what I prefer the most are people who are running frauds, about people who are running a big fraud, right? Mm-hmm. And it builds up to them, like finally everything falling apart on them. So I've been reading Bad Blood.
It's so good.
It is so good.
I read it in 2 days.
It's riveting. I've been just like trying to get every second I can of reading in.
Okay, well, so similarly, piggybacking on this, I watched last night the new documentary, Fire Fraud.
Oh, really?
About the guys that threw the fire festival.
Oh, is it good?
Who are also fraudsters.
Yeah.
I'm so into both of these particular frauds.
Yeah, so if you are into fraud, you got to watch Fire Fraud.
I'm
because,
into it.
Boy, those guys.
There's only one problem with the book is I got it in hardcover, and my wrists are really tired all the time holding it up and stuff.
Poor guy. What? They don't work your wrists at CrossFit?
No, apparently not. So one of the things I did want to highlight, though, is so this is about the story of Theranos, this big once upon a time startup unicorn, as they call it. It had raised billions of dollars. The founder of it, Elizabeth Holmes, was this incredible, obviously billionaire on paper, and great speaker, charismatic person. And it talked about how like dissent in her company really started to build to the point where somebody finally reached out to somebody else, and that person reached out to a blogger, and then that blogger realized that this investigation about all this problems at this place had reached a point where it was over. It was out of his league as a journalist, and he passed it on to a journalist. And the journalist talked about how that moment. It was really great how he like transitions, right? Like from telling the story to incorporating himself into it. And this is just a reminder to everybody out there, if you are at a business or a government agency of some kind or anywhere and you feel like something's not right, or that the world may need to hear a story about what's going on, you should consider sending it to us. We are practiced now for many years in protecting people and making sure we do this diligently and thoughtfully. So send us your tips. You can reach out to any of us individually, and some of us, Andy in particular, has some more confidential ways you can reach out to him set up. So check those out at our site.
One of the incredible things I took away from that book was not just like that the fraud happened, but that so many people rang the alarm so many times, and it was like ignored by the board of the company, which included some really heavy hitters like George Shultz and Henry Kissinger. And it was only when they went to a journalist that things started to really shake out.
What struck me is when that happened, and then she goes on CNBC, and she's just fake news the whole thing. It's fake, it's just not correct. We've told them it's not correct. And it was just haunting to think about all the people who might have been believing her while that was happening, and to now know what we know about how absurd the whole fraud was. A fascinating story. Check it out, Bad Blood. It was a great story. All right, so as we mentioned, we do have a great show. We got Kevin Faulconer's big speech. It was a hot speech, hot content, hot lava content. So hot, it felt not safe for work. There was one word that came up over and over and over again, and this is what it was.
You must say yes, 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 and voting yes. We've said no to new housing for far too long. Yes, in my backyard. From a city of NIMBYs to a city of YIMBYs. Together, we're going to transform San Diego into a YIMBY city. I guess that makes me the San Diego's first YIMBY mayor. To say yes.
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 And yes.
A lot of yeses. This reminded you of another famous performer, huh?
Yeah, so I think I'm the podcast's foremost WWE expert and fan, I'm going to say.
Fair enough.
Fair.
Yeah, the late 90s era of WCW, WWE,
Well,
I could go to town.
Current WWE, I got a lot of Daniel Bryan vibes from this because this is his trademark when he's in the ring. You get the idea.
I got it. Was that the crowd? You were there. Was that the crowd at Balboa Theater? Or where?
Oh, I thought you were going to say the San Diego Seals game last week. There was the crowd did burst into spontaneous applause when the mayor discussed the transit to the airport. It's really remarkable just how popular that idea is.
Yeah. Now, I feel like you've changed because you used to be like very contemptuous of that discussion. And now I think you've seen it as a vehicle to a larger transit discussion, so you seem to be coming along.
I think that is fair. Contemptuous isn't the right word, though. I was never contemptuous of it. It was just never my top priority. And no, I mean, it's a fine thing to do if transit dollars were infinite.
Right.
But given finite transportation dollars, I don't think should be a top priority. Those aren't the same thing. I'm not contemptuous of it.
Got it. All right, so we are going to talk about that speech with him and many of the big points. Let's get into some news, though. Congressman Scott Peters announced this week that he is not going to run for mayor. In a release to his supporters, he said, "People will say I'm afraid I wouldn't win. I can't stop them, but that's not it. Our polling was solid. Never shied from a tough one." All that stuff. He also said something that they've referred to now a couple times. He said, "Although I'm not prepared now to make any endorsement, I plan to engage in the race for mayor in a substantive and meaningful way." So, I don't know, is that money? Is that just a real hearty video? Kind?
Yeah, I don't know exactly what that means. I mean, what else would it mean? You can endorse.
Yeah, I don't know.
And then what else could you do?
I don't know. It's meaningful, I guess. So let me ask you this. Do you think it was a mistake now, looking back, for Barbara Bree to hit him so hard on the pension issue? People are buzzing around town at how some of the city workers and others are mad that she hit the pension issue. I mean, even the most like conservative people in San Diego have sort of seen that as an issue that's passed. Scott Sherman, for example, doesn't bring it up. They monitor the pension system, stuff like that. They watch it and, little tweaks and such. But, now she's come out and like really hit it like a kind of a hawk on that sort of thing in order to set up an attack against him. But now she's getting all the bad side of that sort of attack and none of the good side, it feels like. I don't know. Am I overthinking it?
Maybe. I don't know if it was a mistake. I guess the first question would be, is that still a salient point to voters? And if it is, then it probably wasn't a mistake. If it isn't, then does it really turn certain constituent groups away from her perpetually?
I mean,
Groups
like she could
MEA
have
or
probably
unions,
pulled it out later in the actual campaign. She put it out. The very first statement she makes about running for mayor is an attack on him and on this issue. And now she's got all the baggage that comes with that. This is very horse racy, but it just felt like she might regret it.
Well, I don't even know if it is horse racy. I mean, the issues that you run on are supposedly the alternative to horse race coverage. Now, sussing out how it plays is maybe more horse racy. I think it's early enough that she could just pivot to another topic if it's not something that plays well.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, the mayor's speech also brought us maybe a potential another candidate, Corey Briggs. He was so mad that they're going to legalize more housing along these transit routes that he says if nobody else is going to bring up a problem about it, he's going to count me in, he says, for the mayor's race.
Yeah, so I tried to get in touch with him today to understand exactly what this meant. So again, I'll just read this. He was dismayed that the day after the mayor's speech that no one took issue with the mayor's development proposals. He had expected them to. He saw that no one did. And then he added, quote, "So in the mayor's race, if nobody else is going to fight to protect San Diego's environment and our quality of life, count me in." So I reached out to him to see what that meant. What would it take from another candidate for him to be sufficiently content that it was taken care of, or otherwise what would need to be the case for him to get in the race? And he said, quote, "It is in the statement. It's in all my other tweets. I have nothing to add."
He's so curt sometimes. Well, look, the people who think San Diego is great in these neighborhoods and all across, and we don't need to do anything to increase supply, they were going to find a voice, I feel like, at some point. Now, whether that's Corey Briggs, they were either going to create a voice like him or one of the mayoral candidates or somebody like that was going to be attracted to it as an option. And we'll see if this develops or if somebody else picks it up.
My take on all of this is that people who support what the mayor said and people who think that this is the right policy solution to this problem, and they should be honest with themselves that there's a large group of people. I won't pretend to know if it's a plurality or a majority or just a large group, but there's a group of people in this town who really disagree with that. And they are not confused. They understand what's being proposed, and they don't want it. And you're going to have to directly debate that or decide that those people are just not going to be your supporters. But the idea of talking around it, which has been the plan for the last few years, needs to go away. The idea where you pretend that we all agree on everything. We pretend that there's no big disagreement taking place. And that all that's needed is a new euphemism or a new framing around the same set of plans to no longer call it City of Villages, to now call it the Climate Action Plan, to no longer call it the Climate Action Plan, to call it densifying transit priority areas or whatever. It's an actual disagreement taking place, and it's healthy and it's fine, and we can deal with it.
That group of people probably lines up not coincidentally well with the group of people that don't like vacation rentals as well, right? All right, I wanted to highlight this banana story of the week. Ry Rivard did a great story about the Colorado River. The Colorado River, he says, is just kind of like a giant bank, financial institution of sorts, a bank, but for water. And right now there is a run on that bank. The Metropolitan Water District that serves all of Southern California is drawing down its share of water out of Lake Mead. And metropolitan officials are worried that the federal government is about to step in to ration that water. And that'll be fascinating to watch. On paper, California has more rights to the Colorado River water, and they're so secure that Arizona's water supply would have to run dry before California loses a single drop. And everybody's watching right now because Lake Mead's level, if it drops below 1,075 feet, it sort of freezes everybody's sort of accounts on the water, and Metropolitan in particular is concerned that they won't be able to withdraw more water. So a lot of water at stake. This is a giant political issue. He did an excellent job of explaining this, wouldn't you say, Sarah?
Yeah. I mean, like, water politics in general is bananas. And then, like, you broaden it from San Diego to the Colorado River, which is, like, the source of all economic prosperity in the West. And there's a lot at stake, and a lot of really weird deals go on the river. Like, some people pay farmers not to use water, and they just like sit on their land. And then some states like store their water underground and they can't get it out. And there's just like so many weird things that go on that no one even knows about.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Great story by Rai Rivard. Check it out. All right, last bit of news. We've talked before the year ended about Tony Kravarik. He was quitting his role as the chairman of the local Republican Party, and then he decided to do it again, but he wanted some money perhaps. They authorized and offered him a salary to take that job into the future, and he has turned it down. He says he's going to remain a volunteer. He told us that he just likes it that way, can act more independently. I always thought that, like, you get money, but you would give up like this sort of authority, moral authority that comes, this independence that comes with being a volunteer, right? All right. Without further ado, let's talk to the mayor about that issue, in particular about housing and all these other issues we've been following, and his big speech. Right, we are joined in the great Voice San Diego podcast studio by His Honor, Mayor Kevin Faulconer. Welcome.
Scott, it's great to be back. Thank you for having me.
Yes, this is where you come to, really try to get a boost in the polls.
This is where it happens.
This is where
right here.
Yeah. So, all right, we're gonna see what we can do. All right, we've got a whole bunch of questions here. Everybody want to go over, but we're obviously all talking still about some of the things in your State of the City speech this week. This was what, your fifth or fourth? Something like that.
4 or 5.
Yeah.
Fifth, probably.
And this one, we talked about it earlier. You had a lot of yeses in it. If we did a word cloud, yes would be the big one.
Well, that's good.
Is it? What were you trying to get across?
Well, really a couple of things, but as we make progress, it's saying yes to the things that we need to do as a city, and outlining what particularly. Not only I've seen as mayor, but been on the city council for a number of years. And that's why the real focus was on housing and changing that dynamic and that paradigm with housing and homelessness to get people to say yes to affordable housing, to services for homeless, to moving the needle and making a difference. And, as I talked about during the State of the City, you'll get a lot of folks that'll say, well, I want more homeless services. I just don't want it right here.
Mm-hmm.
I support affordable housing, but I wish you would build it over there. And I said we as a city, and why the focus and the reforms that I'm proposing are citywide reforms, is to take away the ingrained bureaucracy. And I spent a lot of time streamlining and others, but we need to help change the system itself that really allows folks that want to stop all types of housing that have the advantage. I want to flip that on its head, and that's what the new proposals is all about.
Well, you jumped right into it, so let's go with that. Obviously, the biggest news that we grabbed onto, and I think others too, was out of your speech, was this proposal to eliminate height limits for new housing construction along transit areas, and it's specifically within half-mile of transit priority areas, right? These transit stops, basically. And in particular, obviously that encompasses a lot of the city, minus the coastal areas. We can talk about that in a second. But it encompasses a lot of the city. But part of where it's most acute right now and most interesting is the Marina Corridor, the new Old Town to UTC trolley line that's going in, and all of these discussions that we've had along that corridor at Balboa, at Claremont, and at Tecolote, that this will allow for basically taller buildings. Now, I remember you were at PolitiFest a few months ago. We had you up with Darrell Steinberg, the mayor of Sacramento, and the mayor of Tijuana, Juan Manuel Gastelum, and we talked about this issue, and I had asked you because your planning department had just lowered the height limit at one of those stops, and I asked you what you thought and how that corresponded with your points about needing to build around these areas, and this is what you said.
One of the things you're talking about the marina, and that was about lowering heights, not about restricting density, because we need density.
We just passed the Midway Community Plan.
So you were kind of making the point that you could get whatever you wanted without changing the height limits. It feels like you've changed since then.
It's not going to be enough, particularly in our transportation areas. And Andy got to this in his article. We need to make it easier, particularly on the transportation areas, of course, to have affordable housing, to have housing, permanent supportive housing for homeless issues. And it's that combination of height and density that we're going to need if we need to move the needle. We've had some incremental positive change, but I said very directly, it's not enough. It hasn't made a dent in what we need to do. And so the changes that I'm proposing, they're a wholesale change from how we've approached this. And not everybody's going to support that. I understand that. But if we truly want more housing that San Diegans can afford, the status quo is not getting it done.
Was this easier to do for you, though, because your former ally on the city council, Lori Zaff, a Republican, lost the race? She opposed, this sort of thing before, and it was kind of it helped her a lot to do what she did. And now her opponent's a Democrat. She's won, and was it just easier to pull off politically?
No, look, why I'm approaching this citywide is because this change is not just a change for one particular area. If we truly want to make it work, to provide the incentives that we need, and to make a change, it can't be just about Marina. It has to be citywide. I think that's the best opportunity for success. I think it's going to make the biggest difference. But I'm under no illusions that it's going to be easy. If it was easy, we probably would have been done before. But you either believe that we have a housing crisis and an affordability crisis, or you don't. I believe we do. And some of the changes that we've made have been helpful. They haven't been enough.
Okay, we'll be right back with the rest of our chat with Mayor Faulconer. We're going to pay the bills, get some answers from the People's Reporter, and we'll pick it right back up with the mayor after that.
This Voice of San Diego podcast is sponsored in part by Competitive Edge Research. Competitive Edge Research, San Diego's premier public opinion research firm, sponsors this podcast because they like good journalism as much as they like good polling. Since 1987, Competitive Edge has helped clients see the why buried deep within the numbers. Competitive Edge designs comprehensive research studies, collects bulletproof data, and employs robust analytics so you'll understand why things are the way they are. Competitive Edge. Know what to do.
Hey, Adriana Heldes here.
And Nate John. We're on the digital team here at Voice of San Diego.
And we're back with a quick hit on the People's Reporter.
So this is a segment where we answer your questions about the region. Today we have a couple of good questions we wanted to hop on real quick. So if these help you think of your own questions, please send them in. We will put a link in the show notes to help you find where you need to give a question.
Okay, let's get to it.
All right, let's go. Our first question is from Keith. He wants to know how many people in San Diego work. Not government workers, which people are asking a lot about right now, but all workers. So how many people work in San Diego?
Right. So, Keith, it's just over 700,000, 709,400 to be specific, and just over 22,000 are currently unemployed. That's from the Employment Development Department for California.
So, Adriana, the city's population, according to the U.S. Census, is about 1.4 million for San Diego. That means that about half of San Diegans are workers, yeah?
Yeah, approximately. But you also have to take into consideration that not everyone can work.
Not everyone can work. Like people who are disabled maybe, or elderly folks, or babies.
Yeah, I mean... Yeah, that and, babies.
Yes, babies.
Yeah.
Babies don't count. So babies are in San Diego, but they cannot work.
Exactly.
So, Keith, that's your answer. It's about half of the city who are workers in San Diego, a little over 700,000. And we have another question here from Luis Rodolico. Luis wanted to know how he can research who's giving money to which politician and how much. So he wants to get nosy with the numbers and who's giving what to whom.
Oh, yeah, okay. So this is actually fun. So there's a few different ways that you can do this.
Okay.
All online resources that you can check out right now.
Okay, so all of these, he can just go to it right now, have at it.
Yeah, if you have a computer, if you have a smartphone, then you can do it.
Okay, sweet.
So the California Secretary of State Department has a great database called Cal Access, where you can look at the campaign funds each politician has gotten. You can also search by specific committees, parties, and major donors, and ballot measures, which a lot of people don't take into consideration.
Yeah, that's a big one. Ballot measures. Okay, cool. So that's one, Cal Access. What are others?
The other one is called OpenSecrets.org. They keep track of federal campaign contributions and lobbying data.
Okay, cool.
And finally, the city and the county of San Diego have electronic filing systems too, so you can check those out as well.
Okay, that's a lot of options. Of those, which do you like the most?
I like Cal Access,
Why?
and that's because I'm a chismosa, which
Yeah, explain that.
in Spanish means I'm nosy.
Okay.
Which is another reason why I'm a reporter. And I like to
It's a
know
good reason.
who I like to know who's paying my local representatives. And there's just so much information that you can just spend hours in there.
Okay, so it's like nicely organized, so in your spare time you can just nose through that and have a good time.
Right. In your spare time we're doing work, I won't tell.
Okay, sounds good. That makes sense.
All right. That's your quickie for the People's Reporter. If there's something you want to know, tell us. We'll find the answer.
And you can ask your questions on our site. That's voiceofsandiego.org/People's Reporter. And you can check out other questions that people have posed there and our answers to them as well. And we'll post something for this episode with all those links that Adriana was just going through so you can keep people accountable.
Yeah. We look forward to your questions. Catch you next week.
The last few years, the city has kind of been going about its density increases on a community-by-community basis through these community plan updates.
Plan updates, yeah.
Yeah. And that has led to these sorts of localized fights, opposition in Hillcrest over the Uptown plan, or whether it's the various plans in the Mid-Coast Corridor. Is it your opinion that doing it citywide at once could actually have the effect of making it more popular, or at least making the opposition harder to materialize, since kind of it sends the signal that it's a shared sacrifice?
I hope so. And I think what you're also seeing, Andy, is a growing realization, because it's the truth, on the number of units that we need to produce, the need for San Diegans that want to have a place of their own. They don't have that opportunity right now. And unless we actually change, as I said, the entire system, that really looks at it differently, which is how do we actually get the units done, make it easier by right to do that. So to your point, you do not have. So, and I've been a part of those. I was on the council for a number of years. So I went through hours and hours of meetings on fights on different projects, you name the neighborhood. But if we agree as a city that this is important, and it's important in every neighborhood and in every council district, this is the right path to take.
So I'm interested in your own personal evolution on this. Now, this is an interview you and I did together almost exactly 6 years ago, almost to the day. This was specifically about the coastal height limit, which is different, but I think the principle here is the same. So I asked you, do you personally believe that the height limit has had an effect on housing availability? You said, well, of course not. And then you laughed. And then you responded, there are numerous other areas where density is encouraged and planned for, particularly downtown. All right, we have a community plan that calls for 90,000 people downtown, and right now we're at approximately 35,000 folks. What changed your mind on the idea that height limits have an effect on housing prices?
Well, it's all about supply. we need more of it. Mm-hmm. And as I said in the state of the city, we need more housing. Elected officials have sometimes been afraid to say that, but we do. And so, particularly when you look at where we've been, to your point, and where we need to get to, and we're making a huge investment as a region into new transit and transportation. Well, we need to build those units around those areas, and that's why this focus on both density and height around our transportation areas, I think, not only makes sense, but I think it's going to have the desired effect of encouraging more units at an affordable price to actually be constructed. That's just evolving. That's the realities of the market, and I'm optimistic that it's going to have that effect. If we can get this policy approved, it won't be easy. because you will have folks that don't want to see any change. I understand that. But then if you don't want any change, what's your other idea? What's your other solution? We need more units.
Is it fair to characterize it as you having evolved on this since you were on the council?
I hope I continue to evolve on many things.
Yeah.
I learn stuff every day, guys.
Yeah.
But particularly when, the shortage of housing gets more acute every year. And if we don't do something about it, as I said, and as I said, some of the changes that we've made have been helpful. That's great, but it's not enough. And I said that very directly and very clearly in my State of the City speech, because I want change.
All right. So, well, that obviously got our attention, and also YIMBY. You said that a lot. So
I did.
Did you feel really young and hip about it? It's the new thing, really.
Not everybody, after I said it, knew what that was in the media.
Yeah.
But
It's funny how that works. We live in our own world sometimes. So I wanted to talk about something that wasn't in your speech. We've got more from your speech we want to talk about, but this seemed like another bit of news. You did not. It's been a while since we've heard the Chargers in the State of the City speech, but the Chargers in the Convention Center were an annual staple. This year, the Convention Center came up, but you did not say that we were going to try to get an election, and it was the first time in a while we've heard that. You, it seems, have backed away from the idea of a special election this year. Why? What happened?
Well, I did focus on the fact that finally, for the first time, the Convention Center has qualified for the ballot.
It is.
San Diegans are going to have their opportunity to say yes, and I'm going to fight very strongly for that to say yes, because it's not just about the Convention Center and the economic impact and the jobs that's going to create for the city. But again, back to the literally billions of dollars for homelessness and housing. We need that. Scott, I've been very clear. That should have been on the ballot before. We should not have been waiting as a city. If it's important, let the voters decide, and let's put it to them. The need isn't changing, particularly when we talk about funding. And so I addressed that in the speech. I said, my commitment to providing and doing new things for homelessness and others is not going to waver, because we're still going to spend that money. It's going to come from the general fund, and it's not going to come from the initiative, because it'll be longer. So look, I've said that we're going to build the coalition. We're going to continue to gain the support. And I talked about, as we get, new groups on board, labor, Republicans, Democrat, business folks, we've got a new council. 2020 is going to be our opportunity to get it across the finish line. And so that's where I'm going to focus. The need hasn't changed, however. This is critically important to San Diego.
Is it fair to say you did want a special election this year, and that the city council wasn't there for you?
It should have been on the ballot last year.
Okay.
And I'm actually confident the voters would have said yes.
Now, have you guys concluded that initiative would take a 2/3 vote?
Obviously, that's a question, right? Because of, without getting into the Upland decision on citizens' initiatives and others. But I've said all along that you approach it as though it does need a 2/3 vote. Yet I strongly believe, and some of the polling that the Citizens Group had done, it shows that 2/3 achievable. Why? Because people understand how important tourism is to our economy. People understand how important it is, for the first time ever, to have a dedicated source of funding for homeless services and affordable housing, and the dollars that are also attached for street repair, the number one infrastructure priority. Those are not only incredibly necessary, those are incredibly popular across the spectrum of San Diegans. It's the right thing to do. It should have been voted on before, but we will push forward now that it has finally qualified for the ballot, and I'm as confident as ever that San Diegans know how important this is.
All right, I have two questions on this I want to make sure I hit. One is about the land behind the Convention Center, the land known as the Fifth Avenue Landing. The deal that the city made to make sure it could get a hold of that lease in order to expand the Convention Center as is imagined was for last year, for a vote last year.
That's right.
Have those parties agreed to wait till 2020, or are we going to have to give them even more money?
We are in the process of working on an agreement that would extend that for another year.
Okay.
Will that agreement include more cash going from us to them?
No.
Are you considering making the money that is in the initiative? So it's a hotel room tax increase.
Paid for by visitors, right?
Big portion of that, of course, goes to the convention center expansion. The next portion is homeless services, as you've said. One of the interesting things about that, and you've touted as a benefit, is that it doesn't have any direction about where that money goes to. But that has actually caused some concern on the left. And we had a guy at our member coffee this week represent some of those folks that are critical of that.
Yeah.
Are you considering maybe packaging it or making a more clear statement with the city council about where that money would go?
I am.
Or how it could be bonded?
Yeah, I am. And you hit the nail on the point. I think the folks that drafted it put that flexibility in, I think for the right reasons, which is to say this is a revenue source that'll be ongoing for decades in the city. We don't know specifically what some of the needs may be in 30 years, right? And so to tie that up, at the same time, there are some things that we can say that says, okay, when it passes next year, here's how we will move immediately to spend some of these dollars, particularly on homeless housing and others. And so that is absolutely not only something that we are thinking about doing, but will be doing, to make it very clear for not only the city council members, but members of the public, that something around that. Here's where we will spend the money for the first 5 years, type of thing.
Could that include like bonding against that revenue?
Yes, absolutely. That's one of the big benefits of the measure.
Mm-hmm. So it used to be we were considering that as like services and providing temporary things. That might actually go into investment in housing itself.
Yes, it can. It
Okay.
can be both, and I think that's one of the benefits of the way it was written. Is to say it has to go for homeless and homeless services, and that absolutely includes housing, and particularly those, and something I feel strongly about, wraparound services, and particularly on issues of mental health. That's going to be a big push for me this year in partnership with the county.
All right, I'm going to give you a choice. You can do the Old Town campus of the Spay War and your Grand Central thing, or we can do police oversight. Which one do you want to do right now?
Let's do both. How's that?
All right, police. Go
Boom.
for it.
All right. So you did mention police a little bit in your State of the City address. Do you actually support the proposal that Councilwoman Monica Montgomery has mentioned, giving the Citizens Review Board subpoena power to investigate issues within the police department?
I'm open-minded to that because I continue to support the reforms that we've made and continue to make in the police department. And I know Chief Nislight feels the same. When I look back and when I first got elected as mayor, we were right in the midst of some not too good times in our department, and we quickly passed a series of reform, including one of the largest cities to adopt body-worn cameras. That's made a huge difference. That's made a huge difference in terms of transparency for the public, for the officers themselves. And so I always want to look on a reform standpoint on what do we think is going to do with one goal. How are we helping to protect the public, and how are we really focusing on ensuring that trust with our officers and the public? My biggest focus right now continues to be recruitment and retention of the police department. We have a very competitive pay package now, which we did not have, and the council and I put that across the finish line last year. It's showing results. We're seeing full academies. I want the most diverse department we could have, the highest standards, the best men and women, and a department that earns the trust of the community. That's how policing works.
Yeah, I want to talk about that community trust a little bit. So both an SDSU study from a couple years ago and pretty recent data just in the last month that has come out as a result of a law passed by Shirley Weber from San Diego that requires police to collect data on who they're stopping. That includes the San Diego Police Department as one of a handful of agencies that's taking part in that. And both of those have shown that Latinos and Black residents in San Diego are pulled over at a higher rate than their share of the population. Do you have a reaction to that? And have you talked with either the current chief or the former chief at all about the issue of racial profiling?
Yeah, I've set a very clear tone in terms of what I expect as mayor for Chief Nislight, in terms of our officers, in terms of ensuring that not only they have that trust, but we're treating everyone fairly. And we have very high standards. One of the other reforms that came back to the department a couple of years ago was the addition of the Professional Standards Unit, which our police department used to have that went away. We brought that back. So I'm going to continue to never fear data, right? And folks say, oh, do you mind if somebody's doing this or collect that? No, we want that. You want to look at on everything and then peel that back and to say, okay, what are some of the issues behind that data? What does that data really, really show? Because that can only help you to continue to grow as a department, to be stronger. We have some great men and women that put on the badge every day that protect us. I'm very proud of them. And I want to ensure that they continue with the highest professionalism, doing the right thing in every neighborhood in the city.
So one of the things you have been doing lately that caught our eye, of course, was this rapport you're building with the new chief of SANDAG, the San Diego Association of Governments. His name is Hassan Akrada, and he's really come in with. It's been fun to watch somebody with all this optimism about what our region can do come in. And he and you identified the Spaywar property in the Old Town area as a place you might be able to put this thing called the Grand Central San Diego. Now, one of the things I want to ask, would you consider supporting a transit tax of some kind? You did not support the tax in 2016. Was it 16?
Measure A.
Yeah, Measure A. Wow, feels like yesterday.
2018 was 2 months ago.
Yeah. So, you didn't support that. Is there a tax increase that you could support at MTS to make some of these dreams possible?
We're not looking at a tax increase for this particular project. And I think, Scott, that's one of the things that really makes it a great opportunity because it's going to be a public-private partnership. And so you have... We're trying to take the lead because it's important on a timing right now. You have Terminal 1 that's being expanded with the airport that needs to have mitigation. That wasn't happening. You have the port doing their master plan update. And, of course, we need to connect the trolley to the airport. It's been talked about for 40 years in this town. And so with the Navy saying, hey, we have an opportunity now for Spaywar, we're going to need to continue in that footprint, but you can come on in and do other things that you want around it. That's the opportunity to finally connect the trolley, to have a rail station that works. And as I said, and I strongly believe, there's no better transportation regional project right now than this, because whether you're in the East County, North, South, San Diego, we need this. It's not going to be inexpensive, but if you have everybody working together, the airport, you have SANDAG, and you have the ability to bring in private development, right, for some housing and others. That's what makes this, I think, not only exciting, but doable and achievable. But Hassan has been tasked with, okay, we got to come up with a plan. We got to come up with a financing plan and be very real about how much it's going to cost, and then get everybody around the table and say, okay, everybody's going to need to participate in that. I can't emphasize enough how I think the timing on this is our chance to seize this as a region. We've talked about it for far too long. This is the opportunity, particularly with the Navy, and I'm more optimistic on this than I have been in a very long time.
When you announced this, and there was a couple stories in our paper and in the UT, and Mark Cafferty, the leader of the Economic Development Corporation, had a really interesting response to that. He's not usually very negative, but he said something along the lines of, hey, how come nobody even talked about the Navy and the Spaywar need, like making sure everything was okay for those 4,000 or so, employees. They're high paid, important local economic factor. So what would you do? You're still wanting to make sure that the Navy keeps its operations.
We've had discussions with the Navy.
And you'll swap land with them, or how would that?
There's a variety of things on the table. The Navy controls the property,
yeah.
So the Navy's the one that will be driving this. And in fact, I've spoken with both the Admiral and Joe Stuyvesant, and they have a whole team. They're putting it out for a competitive process. I mean, the Navy's, but I think that the Navy, I'll let them speak for themselves, but they understand, I think, the opportunity for they will continue to be at Spaywar, but to have this transit hub and transit center right next to it, I mean, that's exactly what you would want. So they're going to go through an open and competitive process. It's important that SANDAG jump in and be leaders on that. I think, Hassan brings not only a new level of energy, which I think you've rightly got to in your stories, but he's been very successful in his former role up in Los Angeles. Again, back to some of your financing questions, Scott, of leveraging dollars, getting state dollars, getting federal Department of Transportation dollars, he's the right person at the right time.
One last thing on this. So this is sort of a gnarly project in that it has a federal component. Sandag would be involved, public-private partnerships potentially. Could pulling all those things together at the same time potentially delay Terminal 1, or could Terminal 1 go forward as you work those out?
I've said very clearly that expansion is important to our economy, and so we should not delay the expansion of Terminal 1. What's not happening, Andy, was people talking to each other. That's one of the reasons I called everybody in my office and I said, this is too important. We have to agree on a process, number one, but ultimately, what's our goal, guys? What's our goal as a region here? And Sandag is the proper forum for us as regional leaders to help move this across the finish line, to get it to a point where people can say, yeah, it makes sense. Here's how we're going to do it. I think all of the timelines coming together at the same time is to everyone's advantage. Again, there's been study after study after study. Let's actually make it happen and move this thing across the finish line. So that'll either happen, I predict, with some type of vote at Sandag and in the other agencies at some point this year. That's exactly what we need.
So let's move up the street just a little bit. I think this is one of the things that's happened under your administration that's kind of flown out under the radar, but potentially a very big deal is there's about 40 acres of land around the sports arena that have timed to have their leases basically come up all around the same time. And in the meantime, you've also passed a new community plan for that area that significantly upzoned it and potentially made way for development. Can you detail a little bit what's the plan there? I imagine related to this is the need for presumably a new sports arena.
It is. I mean, you look at what that sports arena with all its history, and it's still, what it still means to San Diego. How well the Gulls are doing, and just all the great special events.
And the Seals. Don't forget about the San Diego Seals.
And the Sockers.
The Seals, the Sockers.
Yeah.
Seals. See, the Seals had about like 10,000 people.
I was there. I was one of them.
Andy nicknamed it, I think, wonderfully, the children's pool.
I don't know if that rolls off the tongue, Andy.
It does. Dive in, Mr. Mayor.
Well, but I'll tell you, to have somebody like Josiah who's involved in that's a plus for this city in the region. But you're right on the changes that are coming to that area. The community plan was an important driver of that. There is going to be opportunity for a lot of increased great projects there, starting, of course, with the old post office, right? I mean, that's finally going to get going. And that is an area that is ripe for that type of transit and others. All of those leases are coming together at the same time. So that is one of the areas that we will be looking at this year in terms of what is the long-term benefit to that. We've had a great partnership with the Hans, with AEG, with others. It's a building that has worked. It's not going to be around forever. And so what does that look like in the future? But I will say keeping a sports arena facility in San Diego is incredibly important.
Well, what's the preference? Is it to rebuild a sports arena there as an anchor for new development, or to move the sports arena downtown and have that whole thing freed up?
It certainly works there. There's no doubt about it, right? From ingress and egress, and it's been there for a long time. You've had other discussions for a while. Could you do something in downtown? And what's the site that always comes up? The MTS bus lot. That's easier said than done. You got to move the bus lot. You got to do a variety of things that come to there. But those are probably the two most prevalent sites. But we will move forward on planning for sports arena. That's on the to-do list for this year.
Let's move down the road a little bit more. So this issue with San Diego State, you have begun what I keep calling an unprecedented negotiation, I think, with San Diego State. It's, on the one hand, transformative and interesting and exciting to a lot of people. On the other hand, it's really weird to have to negotiate against somebody that you literally have to sell the land to. If I was required to sell my house to you, I'm sure you'd be really charitable with terms, but it would be an interesting negotiation. So have you picked a team that would represent the city at the table there?
We're right in the process of that. And so that will happen shortly. But, Scott, I'll tell you, I said this in the speech this week, it is an opportunity. Finally, the voters have given us an answer of what they want to see happen. And when you put all the pieces together, I think it's going to work very well for the city. The River Park, long planned. Obviously a home for Aztec football. the other surrounding developments for the university and student housing and others. My primary job and our job at the city for this year is going to make sure that we negotiate a fair price that respects taxpayers and the will of the voters. Can we do that? We can.
So there was some concern. Scott Sherman, councilman, wrote in an op-ed to the UT that he had heard that you were considering either giving the land to San Diego State or really lowballing the amount there. What would be your response to that?
We are going to negotiate a fair price on market value. I've said that very clearly from the beginning. That's the right thing to do. San Diego State has agreed to that. I'm confident that can happen.
And there was some also talk about outside providers that might help you, consultants and such. There was the name Jason Hughes came up as somebody who might negotiate on your behalf.
We're going to be picking a team, but we haven't decided on who that's going to be at this point.
Okay. And so just to reemphasize this issue, so your task force on the stadium issue, the CSAG, as we all remember it fondly.
The heady days of CSAG.
The heady days of CSAG. They recommended that land, 75 acres of it alone, was worth $225 million. Is that the ballpark of where you think the money?
Well, I'm not going to negotiate in public.
Ah, come on.
But we will come up with a price that's fair and that obviously, as I said, respects the voters and taxpayers.
All right. One other thing on this. Mara Elliott, the city attorney, did file a lawsuit against Measure G before it went on the ballot, where she argued that it was wrong to sort of mandate that you had to sell this land to this one entity. Yeah. The court said they weren't going to throw it off the ballot, but they never made a determination about the merits of that lawsuit. When I asked her about it, she said that she still thinks it's illegal, but doesn't have the authorization and isn't going to pursue the authorization to re-litigate it. But it's still alive, as Corey Briggs, the attorney, pointed out. It's still there. It can be re-upped at some point. Do you think that the initiative was illegal, and is that something you can still turn to if you need to?
There's no plans to do that I'm aware of. And I don't think the city attorney is advocating for that, Scott. I can't speak for others. But as I said, the voters made a final decision. We're moving forward.
When is the Raiders home game for week 1? That's the stadium.
That's not in the cards.
That's not in the cards?
Yeah, there was a carefully worded statement where you said your office hasn't had any conversation with the Raiders. Was that a way of saying that maybe somebody else has?
Oh, I think the Raiders have been talking to a lot of folks in Northern California from what I've read this week.
Okay.
So, anyway.
Not so interested in talking about the Raiders?
No, look, our focus is on SDSU and getting that project across the finish line.
All right. So let me ask you, let's step back a little bit. Your successors have already started lining up, or your hoped for success, or they hope at least. I don't know what your preference is. Barbara Bree, your pal on city council, she, in her announcement that she was running, she said, "For too long, the office of the mayor has failed to provide strong, proactive leadership for meeting challenges and the vision we need for our city's future. It's time to get past the revolving door of political insiders if we want real change at City Hall." You have a thought on that?
Not a lot, no.
What do you think of Barbara Bree?
I think she'll have a tough road, but look, you're going to have. It's a tough road for any candidate. Having done it myself. The field hasn't even been set yet. I mean, you know who's going to be in, who's going to be out. I think that's going to work itself through. We're going to get a lot of candidates. I'm going to be focused, Scott, on doing what I think needs to be done and not trying to respond to, the mayor's race and stuff that's going to come out on that. I'm going to keep us focused on getting the job done.
Do you want your friend Shelley Zimmerman to get in the race?
I'll tell you, people keep asking me about that. I think Shelley did a great job as police chief. I know it's something she's considering, but you'll have to ask her.
So, some of the things that you do for the next 2 years, are going to play into the mayor's race inevitably, right? It's just the way things work. In fact, your announcement at the State of the City 2 nights ago was greeted by Corey Briggs last night. I don't know if you saw this, that he said, I've got it here. He said, "Last night's State of the City address was outrageous. Using the housing crisis as an excuse to remove development limits throughout the city, except along the coast, will only make rich developers richer while ruining all of our neighborhoods." He continues and concludes, "So in the mayor's race, if nobody else is going to fight to protect San Diego's environment and our quality of life, count me in. You have any thoughts on?
I'll let Corey speak for himself. Look, one of the things I was encouraged about was there was a lot of strong support from folks on both sides of the aisle. Why? Because this has been talked about for so long. Let's make some changes. Let's do this. And going back to the status quo isn't working. If you think the status quo is working, great. Go ahead. Push on that. But having seen, as I said earlier, the changes that have been made are not enough. We need to do more. It's about saying yes. It's about saying yes in my backyard. It's about changing the rules to make this happen so we can have more housing that's affordable. It's not a Republican or a Democratic thing. This is the right thing to do for San Diego. I think people see that. I think people get on board. Not everybody's going to, right? I get it. Yeah. But if you want to do the right thing for the city, not just for right now, but for the longer term, we need more housing that San Diegans can afford. Not doing any change is not going to happen. Not going to make that happen. So I'm, as I said, you're going to have detractors. Yeah. But I think you're also going to have a lot of folks that shook their head and they said, yeah, it's about time. Let's actually move forward and let's do something. And I hope that the Voice will be a leading, edge on that to try to help change public opinion. Not that a ton needs changing, because I think people see it. But again, I'm going to go back to, if we keep doing things the same way, we're not going to change what's happening.
Do you think that framing and those sets of policies could start to play out as the basis for this mayoral campaign, whether it's between Barbara and Todd or anybody else that gets in?
Well, sure, but for all of the right reasons, because housing was good, is the issue right now, housing and homelessness. And I said it's not just an issue in California, it is the issue. Mm-hmm. And so tackling it head on, not letting, perfect be the enemy of the good. And as I said, I'm not waiting anymore for solutions. And that's not just the tone that we've set, but in terms of action. Folks want to try different things and do different things. Fantastic. I'm all up for your ideas and solutions, because again, it's about doing new things, whether it was the storage center, which I got fought on and is working, which was the bridge shelters, who got fought on and is working, which is some of the housing proposals, which we will get fought on, but I think is going to change the dynamic in the city for positive and for change. But that's what the discussion is going to be about, I think, and rightfully so, for the next mayor's race. But I'll tell you, anybody who wants to say, no, I want to go backward or keep it status quo, they're not going to be doing the right thing for this city.
I want to ask one more thing about 2020. We touched on it briefly, but moved away from it. MTS is currently working on a potential sales tax measure for transit that could morph or be combined with a Sandag measure. Your read of the state of things. Could you support a sales tax increase for transit?
I haven't been focused on that. And as I said, you'd always have to demonstrate and show need. What I have been focused on is the airport with our trolley, and I think we can do it without raising taxes, the public-private partnership. And I'm going to be focused and laser focused next year on getting the homeless and convention center measure across the finish line. We have to get those two things across.
Have you met Gavin Newsom as the governor yet?
I have not. Met him several times, obviously, lieutenant governor, but looking forward to do that.
Are you devastated John Cox didn't win?
It's you win elections and you lose elections, Scott.
But the governor's budget, you seem pretty positive on that.
Look, I'm going to give credit where credit's due, and I'm going to call out when I think something's not going the right way. But the state investment in homeless is welcome, and I said that. And in fact, last year with Mayor Steinberg, Mayor Garcetti, we made that a big push of ours to actually get direct state funding, particularly when the state took away our number one source of affordable housing, which was redevelopment. That was a tragic mistake for the state. It absolutely should be reinstated, and there's some measures to potentially do that. But back to the what we pushed for last year is the big city mayors, was to say we need your help on this funding, and particularly when we're seeing one of the largest quote unquote surpluses. Help give us some of those money back and put it to use. The governor increased that in his budget, and that's why as I said to our state, our local delegation, I give credit where credit's due.
Mayor Kevin Faulconer, thanks for taking the time.
Thank you, guys. Good to see you.
Boom. Good stuff. That was
Okay,
awesome.
enough, guys?
Yeah, that was great.
Have him
Covered a
back
lot.
again?
Yeah.
Thanks for listening to the Voice of San Diego podcast. I'm Scott Lewis, CEO and editor-in-chief at Voice. Andy Keats is the assistant editor. Sarah Libby is the managing editor. The show is produced by Nate John and Adriana Heldis. And thank you always for joining us, and we'll talk to you next week.